And we're live. Welcome, everyone, to the Krisullis Podcast. This is the Genesis series. We created the Genesis series, which was a function of the observations that we made around some phenomenal work that many founders across the globe have been diving into with respect to problems, but also gaps and needs that they were either experiencing or seeing others go through. And the Genesis is all about shining the light on these founders who care, who have and bring meaning into their missions and into their companies. And we are so excited to have our guest today. But before we introduce her, a little bit about the chrysalis. So, the chrysalis, which is the cocoon where the butterfly the caterpillar goes into the cocoon in order to go through all these very painful changes in order to emerge as a beautiful butterfly. And we have used this metaphor and this analogy because we realize that on an individual and on a collective level, we all go through several changes, and we can do this very consciously, and we can grow and transform on purpose and with intention. And the Chrysalis has been doing this work for the last 5 years in Africa. And our co host, Rolanda, is also a consequence of one of our STEM programs that we had in Ghana. We're very proud to have her on board. She's also currently leading our Supernova Ghana program that we are curating right now, which is focused around talent readiness. Rolanda, before we introduce our guest, would you like to say hi to everyone chiming in now or later?
Yes, I can do that now. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on the Genesis edition for this podcast. We know it's going to be very insightful. I looked at some of the topics that we're looking at, the themes and everything. And myself, I'm ready to gulp down some wisdom nuggets and then also get that running for my life as well. So thank you very much for joining in. You're not going to regret for joining in at all. Welcome once again.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rolanda. And now over to our guest. Our guest, we've had a few conversations, and the work that she is doing, which you will learn more about as we unpack today's episode, really moved me. One, because of my own experience as a healthcare professional, and then the intelligent, meaningful way that she has been able to bring this in such a remarkable, powerful way. So let me introduce Andrea to you. In her own words, Andrea specializes in designing and operationalizing products at the intersection, excuse me, of trauma-informed care, AI, and high-stakes communication. As the founder and CEO of Empathium, she leads the development of adaptive emotional intelligence infrastructure for healthcare, education, and human services. Her platform integrates trauma informed simulations, clinician guidance tools, and patient facing support companions to reduce communication related errors, improve patient experience, and strengthen outcomes. Her background spans social work, program design, behavioral health, and systems level leadership. She builds solutions with equal attention to clinical rigor, emotional intelligence, responsible AI governance, and real world feasibility. Empathium partners with physicians, researchers, universities, and early adopters to validate use cases and prepare for enterprise deployment. Her initial beachhead is OB-GYN, obstetrics and gynecology, maternal health, where communication failures have some of the highest human and economic costs, and where emotionally intelligent technology can meaningfully shift outcomes. She is driven by a simple belief: if we want better systems, we have to build tools that make emotionally intelligent care scalable. Welcome, Andrea. My gosh, what a powerful, powerful write up. Before we dive in, would you like to say a few words about yourself.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm just beyond honored that the path that I'm on right now has me interacting with people like yourselves. I'm just honored to be in your presence and in the presence of the work that you're doing. So I really appreciate you trusting me with your platform and having me here. And I'm a simple person. I'm a social worker. My mother was a social worker. I come from a family of social workers and educators, and the origin has always been if you can help. And so that is how I've always lived my life. It's how I raise my children. It's how I am comfortable moving through the world. So empathium is a part of that. It's leveraging where the world is now and the conversations that it's ready to have, and sort of the mechanisms for having that conversation, which is through, in many ways, technological advancement. But it's infusing that conversation with the content that I think is helpful and necessary for us to not lose the soul of what it is to be a human being in relationship to other human beings. And I think we have a lot of tools that have been, purported to make connection easier, to make connection scalable. And in fact, they've just been a part of, contributing to this extreme loneliness and isolation epidemic that we're living in right now. And so empathium, the idea behind it, and then truly the idea behind how I live my life and how I've always lived my life professionally and personally is, only connect first. So I'm excited to be building it, and I'm excited to be sharing it here with you.
Wonderful. Through what you just shared, it feels like the sense I get is that your mission is, even though what I read about you right now speaks directly to specific types of patients and specific gaps that you have seen, my sense is that the mission is much larger and addresses a highly ubiquitous problem at the moment, which seems to be everywhere in terms of you've spoken about loneliness. I think that's a very powerful word that you brought up, and it goes beyond the walls of a clinical setting, to where we have people of all ages experiencing what you're talking about, what you're feeling, and what you're probably thinking about from the larger perspective of empathium. And I'm assuming this also kind of comes back to the work that you have been doing, with regards to social work and things like that. So, uh, what if you were to talk specifically about some of the things that you have seen from a gap perspective in healthcare, that prompted you and encouraged you to birth empathium? What were some of those things that you have witnessed and been experienced, maybe yourself or with patients as well?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. So it's interesting because it's interesting that you use the word birth, because I would say that my instinctual answer to that question is I experienced labor and delivery from the perspective of the patient. It was my labor and my delivery, that was communication failure from end to end. And every person that I interacted with is interesting because this is not an indictment of healthcare and our healthcare system. It's not an indictment of healthcare and healthcare workers. It's an indictment of the system that we all are forced to operate in. But my birth story from my son, who's 8 years old, was an intervention cascade that didn't need to happen, and it almost ended in losing my son. And I can tie the risk that was posed to both him and I physically, directly to unnecessary interventions that, had I been able and empowered and informed enough to talk to my provider and have my provider been activated enough to really hear me and understand what I was saying, could have been avoided, right? And there are a lot of different elements. There's so many different social determinants of health, but also our social context, our economic context, all those things that impact what happens in that room what happens in every room, really, between a provider or someone who's on one side of the table and somebody who's on the other side of the table, because that's really what we're talking about, right? Like what happens um, in communication when you're bringing in all these external factors and then trying in the moment to navigate a real situation that's happening between you. And so what I've found in my own experience after I had that time and I was able to reflect back on it, and then I started doing work with Tribe, which was a co-op, a doula co-op that I started with a few other folks after I was activated around that experience in Dayton, Ohio, where there was a lot of financial impetus to solve the issue of extreme disparity, racial disparity in terms of infant and maternal mortality in that small little area. And then I was navigating, and kind of processing my story and how, where was the breakdown and trying to understand that, and then as I've widened the aperture here with Empathium and really started to take a look at, my idea initially was just helping prepare social workers. And then I, started looking at this problem systemically. What I found is that the gap it's not clinical, it's relational. So healthcare has this extraordinary, medical expertise, but almost no infrastructure to prepare folks for the human side of care. So we train clinicians on procedures, we train them on diagnostics, we train them on protocols, but we don't train them for the conversations that are going to make or break folks' outcomes, right? And that's something that moving outside of just this vertical or that one or this kind of sphere or that sphere, hospitals or social work settings or what have you, that's a reality that can be generalizable, right? So I've found that good care collapses, without good communication. And just taking healthcare in general, healthcare treats communication as an afterthought, and that's the gap. So my own birth experience, which was traumatic for me, it made that really clear. I wasn't harmed by a lack of medical knowledge. I had an excellent OB-GYN, right? But I was harmed by a lack of attunement, a lack of clarity, a lack of responsiveness to what I was sharing. The people in that room had absolute clinical skill. I chose my OB-GYN with much intention, but we weren't aligned as human beings. And so that nearly killed me and my son. And that's when I recognized, like, if we don't fix communication, we can't fix outcomes. So.
Wow. I'm taking in what you're talking about, and you you said healthcare and you spoke about clinicians, and it's very interesting because because I'm a nurse by profession, although I never, after graduating, I got into HR. I worked for 4 years while we studied, so I kind of understand what you're talking about, because the focus uh, on within patient care is very clinical as well, meaning that it's just very stark and very linear. And the missing part, the humanizing of that care, is not something that's brought in. The emotional part, the mental part, the spirit of the human is never really attenuated to a point where healthcare professionals are even thinking from that dimension.
Mm-hmm.
uh, and you so from what I gather, the work that you're doing, while you've spoken about it being systemic and recognizing that healthcare professionals need it, my sense is that this is also something that is a lot more comprehensive,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that it's not just the caregiver, but it's also the patient, the person receiving the care, that also requires to be brought in a way that is allows them room to feel like they're seen and feel like they're heard. And a lot of times that may from a healthcare perspective, that may not we may not have the time. Like when it's pregnancy, yes, we have months to prepare, but
Right.
in cases of emergency, may not have that time. But creating the systems to allow and encourage healthcare professionals to start to think and feel in this way,
Mhm.
can help welcome a very different healthcare professional approach. Um, and I'm just curious, and I know these questions are actually coming through right now as you're saying these things, even to our audience, to let you know that while we prepare, whatever kind of unravels through the conversation is really where we want to unpack it further. So tell us, how do you see the work that you're doing? Because there is an entry point, but I'm sensing there's a lot more coming from empathium
Yeah.
beyond what you're talking about, if I'm understanding it correctly.
You are, so when I said that we wanted to build the adaptive emotional intelligence infrastructure, an infrastructure is that foundational piece, and then many things can be built on top of that foundation, right? And so it's been challenging as a startup to want to narrow in and focus in on one element of what you're building and where you go first, because there's so many different elements and areas where I can see that emotional and relational intelligence has been left behind. And so, what I'm talking about right now is Empathium Health, which is this product that we're building, or this I don't even want to call it a product, like this movement toward a new standard of care.
Mm.
But we're building that across a variety of different spaces. And so that's the one thing that I would say about our vision is it exists in corporate learning and development. It exists when I said that I wanted to serve the front lines of care, what I heard from folks is, we are on the front lines too. Can you
Mm.
consider me too? Customer service is the front lines of care. Law enforcement is the front lines of care. Crisis response is the is the front line of care.
Yeah.
And so as I began to take in those conversations, I spoke to someone and he said, your mistake is going to be in determining your market before your market determines it for you. That is a very business way of saying, for me, my interpretation as a humanist is there are so many different people that want to be able to relate to each other better. And so then that sparks all of my ideation, that sparks all of my innovation, that sparks all of my excitement around where can we intervene? Where are the spaces that people are open to having better tools and better systems to be able to bridge the gap between one human and the next, right? And that's both personally, excuse me, and professionally. As it relates to Empathium Health, you're absolutely right that engaging the clinician only is not something that is going to necessarily intervene and provide the level of change that we would like to be able to see in that patient provider dyad, right? One of my advisors is Dr. Karen Scott, and she is an amazing health equity advocate, beyond advocate, right? Like she is an activist, and she's a physician, and she's an obstetrician, and so many more things. And not only has she been helping me in terms of providing me with information and frameworks relative to her, to her platform, which is Sacred Birth, which is this book that she's written in this amazing framework for redefining obstetric care. She has also been an advisor for me in understanding what needs to happen relative to that systems level intervention, and how important that patient provider dyad is. And so my original problem solution fit was, I see that the problem is care breaks down at the moment of communication. So how do we intervene in that? And my first thought process was, well, within the training structure for physicians and nurses, as you've noted, that human element of care is not present. It's certainly not present in a standardized way. So my thought process was, we intervene at that training layer, and we inject more emotional and relational intelligence as a standard of care, standard of practice, standard of education. And then we have better outcomes. And while that's true, and we are excited that we're going to be partnering with universities in the spring, starting in the social work, social healthcare space, but moving into medical students and medical and clinical training spaces. That's true. But if the breakdown is happening right now, then there's a whole swath of people that are like far outside of having had their education, right? And maybe we can catch them for some continuing education stuff, right? But that's a very difficult problem solution, um sort of architecture, for lack of a better word, right? And so then I started thinking about, okay, what does it mean to intervene at the point of the problem, right? And so it's not just the clinician that lives in that moment, it's also the patient. And so we were thinking, it can't be the same solution because you're navigating different circumstances. So as you just spoke to, in obstetric care, there is some time, but let's say that you are not in that space, right? Like you're receiving on you're working with an oncologist, or you're working in some other high pressure situation where you're navigating care with a whole fleet of people, and you're trying to figure out, like, what is the consistent way that I show up empowered, and what is the consistent way that we honor this person's humanity. That requires a different intervention than just training one person. And so our goal with Empathium Health is embedding at the moment prompts. So like the idea so far, now this is something that's being co-designed with our physician partners and our executive level healthcare executives, right, to make sure that we've calibrated the solution correctly. So this is just Andrea's pie in the sky idea, right? But my idea is that we'd be able to embed Empathium in the EHR, to be able to provide a prompt right there in the beginning, right before the interaction. Like I'm going into an interaction, I know what the diagnosis is. Here's a prompt that's going to bring in this person's social determinants of health and other things that we've ingested from the EHR to say, here are facts about this person. Here's how you do this safely, right? 3 suggestions for this is what they've navigated before. They're navigating some trust issues. Don't take guardedness as a lack of willingness to engage. Because one of the things I'm learning from our physicians is like, they're trained to treat the perfect patient. So anything that goes against sort of the idea that a patient would take in their advice or what have you is seen sometimes as like you're being obstinate to the type of care I'm trying to give. But there's so many different reasons for why someone would show up in that way. So anyway, prompted right before the moment. But then we're talking about that, like what happens in the moment and then what happens after for the patient when they leave. And that is where we started building Grace, which is our AI healthcare companion for the patient. And Grace is designed to do, to your point, Caroline, what physicians and care providers sometimes don't have the time or the availability or the access to even be able to do, which is say, the information in your EHR from your provider is the source of truth. This is not, and this is not a second opinion. This is what expands that knowledge and that expertise and puts it into human language for you to be able to understand, and is able to come alongside you as a part of your care journey. So I have a friend, my best friend, who got diagnosed with breast cancer, and it was super aggressive because she'd noticed a lump in June and they did not give her a mammogram until July. And by the time at January, she noticed the lump. They did not give her a mammogram until July. So it metastasized by then. And so all of a sudden, she went in thinking that she had dense breast tissue. She comes out with this form of aggressive cancer that has metastasized. And so she has all of this information, all of this stuff, all of a sudden, this plan that she has to do, and it's highly aggressive. And it's like all of a sudden everything is an emergency. And she didn't know how to navigate that, not just, emotionally, but also practically, right? And so I imagine that Grace is the companion to say, let's take this 15 pages of discharge paperwork and break it down so you understand it. We know that the most dangerous time in a person's care is the first 48 hours after they've been discharged, right? And for maternal care, that's the first 2 weeks. That's when the risk of readmission is really high. And that risk is not just a risk to the patient, it's also a risk to the hospital. So we're taking all of these things that we know, long story short, because you've got me on a tangent and I'm excited about it and I'm passionate about it, so I'm talking about it, but we're taking that moment and we're saying, what is the proper intervention for that? And so I imagine that Grace not only explains, but she empowers. Because as you understand the system that you're operating in, and as you understand instructions, you also understand better what's happening with you, as a person. And then you have an outlet, right, to be able to say, like, I'm having a really hard time with this. And I imagine that Grace is that companion as well. Because again, Empathium is about emotional intelligence. So we're not just building a generic tool that just is a mindless, bot that can explain just in really rote terms, this is what your doctor said to do. We understand that connection and compassion is also really important. So as much as we possibly can, we are leveraging all of the machine learning and natural language processing tools at our disposal to create a companion that can also adapt to the emotional state of the patient, to be able to say, I'm scared right now. Like, I'm really scared. I don't want to go to chemo tomorrow. Like, it hurts, and I'm sick and I'm scared. To be able to say, like, I hear you and I see you. Not everybody has that. When we move out of obstetric care and you move into rare diseases, you move into the invisible disabilities, you move into spaces where people don't necessarily always have community around them. You talk about intervening with people who labor alone and they don't have a community to say push, or here's your baby, or let's do some skin to skin, whatever, right? There's so many ways that we are navigating these really, really scary things, and we're doing it by ourselves. So again, grace is not about replacing humanity, but it is about scaling compassion and care. So I will leave it at that, right? But the idea of where we're trying to go is that we are priming providers for compassion in the language and within the workflow that works for them, because I know that their desire is to do care and do care well, right? And then we are priming physicians or patients to be knowledgeable, to be educated, and to be empowered enough to be able to be active participants in the care themselves. I'll stop.
Before I pose a question, I want to look over at Rolanda. Rolanda, is there anything coming up that you would like to share or like to ask Andrea?
Yes. So, mine, I'm very happy about how far you have gone with the health sector as well. What happens to the rest of us who are in other fields aside clinicals or health services? So, when it comes to economics, when it comes to social work, okay, social work, let me break that down into maybe sectors and as well. What do we do? How do we come to terms with emotional intelligence, which is the AI or your bots that you also use? I hear of Grace as well, that is helping with patients and then breaking down, complex documents for them to understand. But then what happens to the other person who is working in maybe communications
Mhm.
or working in any other field aside that of health? Yeah.
I'm really excited to talk about that. So one of the things I learned, that when I was trying to say, okay, so like scaling outside of healthcare, folks are coming to me and saying, like, I want to use this and I'm an HR, and I want to use this and I'm a lawyer, and and I'm like, okay, so how do I ground empathium in that, right? And what I found was that this was a crazy number. I had to check it like 4 times because I was like, there's no way this is true. But US businesses in the US only lose $1.2 trillion every year to poor communication. So that's 1.2 with a T at the end, right? So we're not training our workforce. That's not, we're just leaving them to the void and hoping that that they learn the skills that they need. That is poor communication very specifically. And so when I started looking at that, right, and where empathium can intervene, I can speak to it from both a social work space, because I will end with social work because that's my heart, right? But in terms of just in general, I'm learning that true behavioral change and adoption doesn't just happen at the policy and procedure level. That's what we train for, right? Like when we do we're doing onboarding training, or our agency or organization has us doing training because they adopted some new learning system, right? Like that's what we're training for, but we're not necessarily training for the practice of working with people, and like putting those trainings together with, I have to actually do this thing that you taught me to do with another human being. And that's where that breaks down. And so 60 to 70% of leaders are saying that they feel like the training that they invest in is not necessarily driving behavioral change at a level that makes that investment worth it. And so our idea is that we provide a platform where people can come in and do conversational role play and simulation based role play to be able to put the policies into practice, because that's where the breakdown is, that theory to training gap. And that, when you take a look at it, exists everywhere. So like as a social worker, one of the things that I found, and this was the grounding problem, this is the grounding issue that birthed Empathium, was me thinking about and remembering the fact that when I first got into the field, and even years beyond, I really felt like the education that I had was amazing, but it also failed to account for the complexities of what it is to be on the front lines of care and be really vulnerable to, like when you're a social worker and you're in a community mental health or behavioral health setting, like anybody who walks through the door is your client, right? And so you have to be on, and you have to be ready to serve such a wide variety of patient types or client types, and that can be really difficult. There's no way that 3-4 years in school, if you have that, is going to be able to prepare you for that. And what I'm hearing from instructors now, as in social work, is that we are moving into more hybrid or online only models, which is great for scaling education, not so great for scaling skills. And then that the programs are getting shorter and shorter. So I'm talking to an instructor in Florida who has less ability to connect with the students because it's all online, and the classes are only 7 weeks long. So it's a matter of like, how do you reflect the realities of a really, really, really complex field in a way that scales knowledge and accessibility, like and access to that knowledge. And so we use AI powered conversational role play and simulations, wherein instructors can come in and bring their modules, or businesses can say, this is the training that I want to give. And then we are embedding the behavioral, like the practice piece, so that people can come in and say, like, I call it like a flight simulator for human care, right? And for human interaction. So you're building the reps so that you know exactly what you need to do. So pilots, they go into flight simulators and they practice all of these emergency situations so that when the emergency happens, they're not navigating that in real time, right? They know exactly what to do. They're not panicked. They're not stressed. They've seen this before. And so the idea is, whether you're a customer service person who's getting yelled at, I've done it, whether you are a social worker and you're navigating having to do a child welfare removal, or you're working with somebody who's in active psychosis, if you're a therapist and you're like, oh, I have to do a wellness check on this person, or you're a victim advocate, or you're working in intimate partner violence space and you are doing a lethality assessment, and you realize there's something really dangerous about the situation. Whatever is happening in that circumstance that you're navigating, the idea is that Empathium will help prepare you for the moments that matter before they happen. And I'm hope that is our, so Empathium Health is a very intense, but it's also a very specialized version of what we do. On the whole, the wider swath of what we're trying to do is build that relational readiness. And so that platform that we're building is our main mechanism of doing that.
Thank you so much. If I'm getting you right, it means that the issue of emotional intelligence have to be something that you personally want to deal with, because loneliness is very key. And then wherever we find ourselves relating with other people. So we need to really learn how to put together emotional intelligence and also our work ethics as well, or systems, so that we can better interact with other people and then get the solutions that we are looking for. That's very clear. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Andrea, and thank you, Rolanda, for that powerful question. Um, is grace empathium?
Yes. So grace is the brain of grace. So we have our what we're calling our ERIC core, which is adaptive, emotional, and relational intelligence core. And it is trained in a variety of different ways on a variety of different frameworks. And I'm so grateful that people have come out and said, "Hey, I have a framework that may be helpful." And we've been able to be very selective, very intentional about building out what is our core, how does it function, and everything that we do, whether it is our conversational AI training platform, or it is our AI companion. It's all powered from the same brain, and that's really important for us. So across different industries, there are going to be specific frameworks that are sort of turned on for that level of knowledge, insight, awareness, and training. But at its core, Empathium is Empathium, and it is trained on some very specific relational and emotional intelligence tools, because we want everything that we do to come from the same mission-driven and quality-assured foundation. So grace is empathy in that way.
How has birthing empathium and bringing grace into the world helped to heal the traumatic experiences you have lived through?
Mm. I think that when you are facing trauma, you have two choices. Well, you have many choices, but I think of it in my life as having two paths. And that is either reacting or creating. The same word, same letters, different words altogether, right?
Mm.
And so for a really large part of my life, I only had the skills to react. I only had the platform to react, reacting to the fact that, it's interesting looking at my birth story and then, looking at generational trauma, which is real, looking at the effects of epigenetics and how trauma is stored in our DNA, which is real, looking at the way that trauma is passed down through lineages, which is real. My mother's birth story was that, she was 18, I think, laboring alone and left me at the hospital because she didn't have a choice. And then my first birth story is highly traumatic. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not to say that when my daughter goes to give birth, she won't have an ability to have an amazing story, because she will. But for a really large part of my life, I had a lot of stuff to react to. And now I have this platform and this ability to take all of those things, to take that lonely girl and give her a companion, right? That lonely person that I can't even imagine going through labor alone as a teenager. I can't imagine going through labor alone. I can't imagine going through labor as a teenager. I can't imagine um, making that very adult decision as a child, essentially, to be able to say, I love you so much and I can't give you what you need. I can imagine being 26, 27 and feeling like I'd failed my son before he was even born because something was happening, but I was losing him, and I felt like a failure. I felt alone. I felt like, oh my God, there's this thing that women do. I failed it. I couldn't do it, and of course, there were so many different things happening, but being able to say, I can take all of that and all of the stories that I have taken in, ingested, metabolized, that, have become a part of our infrastructure and our foundation, to be able to bring life into that, to be able to say we can intervene before someone else's story becomes a tragedy. We can be a part of someone else breaking the cycle of generational trauma and a lack of and disenfranchisement and a lack of empowerment in their space is really important, especially as I spoke yesterday at the Black Maternal Health Summit, and looking at what healthcare has been to Black and brown bodies, like looking at what it's done, looking at the way that we've built an entire healthcare system um, on disenfranchisement and silence, right? And we look at what happened to Henrietta Lacks, and we look at you know, the the syphilis experiment, and we look at what happened with in the Holocaust when people were being, experimented on horribly. When we look at what has happened with slavery, where they were, you know, experimenting with different procedures on people without anesthesia. And even now, how there is this concept in healthcare that Black and brown people experience pain differently, and the impact that that has on our care in real time. So to be able to say, I am providing some small part of this change that can provide a new standard of care for people that have never had a system set that standard for them in a way that is safe, effective, healthy. That feels like more than just healing for me. It feels like the kind of tool that people can use to heal themselves. That feels really, really, really important, that we all be doing the healing work um, for the sake of our own individual story and where it sits in our sort of social economy or social ecosystem as well.
So remarkable, so remarkable. I have goosebumps as you say all of that. as we're winding down, because there are a lot of things to unpack through what you're feeling, and I know that the both of you are feeling into what's going on in this space at the moment. Rolanda, do you have anything before we, kind of wind down today's conversation?
Well, I think I've actually taken in a lot of information as well, not only when it comes to health services or their social work, but also when it comes to our social, our relational life as well. So that's a very good one. And I see the way Ms. Andrea speaks with passion. And that should be the core mandate of every human being, wherever we find ourselves. The fact that we are always looking forward to solving the problem and not allowing other people to experience what we have experienced is one thing that I really love about what she has said. And then I'm very grateful for what she has said. And I have learned a lot, and I'm going to work with that. Anyone hearing us should really take that into consideration as well and work with that as well. Yeah.
Andrea, your story is very powerful, especially, given that you took those experiences, those learned lessons to bring forth something so powerful, so beautiful, and using something that, to a very great extent, is being demonized at the moment, and I'm referring to artificial intelligence. And here you are presenting a case with a field that is so sensitive, in a space where we're talking about pain, trauma, life, death, and challenging that status quo, on that level, to say that not just from the perspective of something in the field of medicine, life or death, science, that you want to completely shatter the old paradigms of how people show up, but also bringing in something that is cutting edge, which is still being defined into this space, and really feeling for the gift of life, and how we can practice grace and empathy in these moments, are very, very palpable. I can feel it, and I know Rolanda is feeling it too. um, what does what would success look like, feel like, for you and Empathium?
Success feels like Empathium is everywhere I can see us being. When I say the emotional intelligence infrastructure, industries turn to us and say, like, we realize that that's a missing part of what we've been building, and we are just everywhere. Not just for the financial return, although I am being brave and being able to say that I think it's time that we are able to promote ourselves and those kinds of things. And I want to see more team women of color founders like win, right? Because then that's also success, right? Because that shows someone else like you can do it. And so I don't feel shy about saying that I want to be successful in that way. I feel very empowered by saying that. I want to be out front. I want people to see it because I want people to see that it's possible and that it matters, and that who does it also matter, right? But I think industries across verticals saying it is important for us to learn how to connect to each other, that would be successful. And then I think, as we've looked at, Empathium started in the professional space, like with social workers, nurses, educators. But, what we're learning is that the communication crisis isn't limited to the front lines. It's everywhere, right? Like people are struggling in their marriages, their friendships, their families. We're about to go home for the holidays and navigate a lot of real difficult, challenging stuff, right? And that is where a lot of times we're breaking down, we're getting more isolated, we're getting more insular, we're getting more dogmatic, it's getting harder for us to relate to each other, not easier. And
Yeah.
so, that is where Empathium is starting to build Tend, right? Which is this product that is for the rest of us, for every day. It's that, like, it's the little sibling for real life. It's that private space where the conversations that matter most at home, not just at work, also get that support. So ideally, pie in the sky, people are using our tools professionally, and then they're coming home and they're saying, like, I really want to get better at this relationship. And they're using Tend as well to tend to themselves, tend to their relationships, tend to their communities. And we overall just start to get a lot better and a lot more intentional about navigating our relationships with ourselves and our relationships with the people that matter.
So beautiful. So beautiful. Thank you so much for making the time to be present and to open up so willingly. You used the word willingly earlier, where you said lack of willingness to engage. That's such a powerful thing. The willingness to engage is probably one of the pillars of successful relational
Mhm.
growth, and it takes two people to do that, have that willingness, do the inner work, and want to advance the relationship
Mhm.
forward. Thank you for the work that you're doing and championing and being an advocate for, not just in the space of healthcare, but for women everywhere, for women of color in this room and those who will be watching in. And we're very proud of the work that you're doing on behalf of our team as well.
Well, I'm really proud to be here. Your team is phenomenal. It's been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for the thoughtfulness and the intention and the things that you were able to excavate about Empathium. It's wonderful to have a space to talk about it, and it's wonderful to talk about it with people such as yourselves and the amazing, and the work that you're doing in the space that you're in. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And Rolanda, thank you for being such a generous, gracious co host today. I always love your enthusiasm, your determination, your resolve. I've seen that for the last 2 years now. So it's been an honor to have you as the co host of the Krisullis podcast.
Thank you so much. For today, I think I didn't come to co host, I came to learn from myself as well. I think I have a few things that I would like to tell the audience today. Um, we find ourselves in places where we forget that there's people we are relating to. In Ghana, I would use Ghana as an example, and we find ourselves at workplaces where your boss, you're even scared to go there. And for me, lucky enough, I happen to work in a CSO organization where we also look at social work as well, and we also look at benefiting other people, transparency and accountability, and then also with other initiatives that myself and some colleagues have also started. And I think that this that you have said, Miss Andrea, has given us the empowerment to also keep up, because at some point we're looking at them, we're saying, no, this thing is not working, but what do we do? You have really empowered me this evening to also keep up with what we are doing, even though it might look slow that we are moving in that direction, but it will definitely work. And as Miss Caroline had also said, the AI thing has been like more idolized, like it's coming to take our work, it's taking away everything, but that's not it. Until we come to the realization that AI has come to stay and that we have to find a way to adapt to it and better use it, we'll not be able to find the benefits of it. And that's what you have done. You have used a very specialized way of using AI to also solve a problem. And that's one thing that all youth must also endeavor to do. And this is a great empowerment for me. Thank you so much for your time as well. And it was glad having you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And to all our viewers, those watching in as well as those who will watch in, um, we will be sharing Andrea's links. Andrea, how can people connect with you and reach out to you?
They can connect with me on LinkedIn. I am under Andrea Jordan, and you can search Empathium, and you can find me there as well. You can also search Empathium at www.empathium.ai, or you can reach out to me directly at Andrea@empathium.ai. However you want to talk to me, I am excited to hear from you.
Thank you all for joining in, and we look forward to the next episode of the Genesis series. Join us then. Thank you so much. See you soon. Bye bye.
Bye.